Good afternoon, folks. Appreciate everyone joining us here today. We'll wait a few more minutes just in case there are a few late stragglers to come and join us for this Facebook Live event for protesting property tax webinars. Our webinar here. So just wanted to take a minute to introduce ourselves here. So my name is Casey Gorge. This is my colleague Daniel Tovar. We are with Land Sale Texas. So Land Sale Texas, we specialize in land investment and land brokerage in the greater Austin area. So if you're interested in land investment and learning more, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm a licensed agent as well. Would love to help you navigate those waters. Or if you are interested in selling your land, we'd love to have a conversation with you because, as mentioned, we also buy and sell land. So again, I'm Casey Gorge. Wanted to introduce my colleague here, Daniel Tovar. Again, we'll get started here in a couple more minutes. We'll wait for a few more folks to join, so really appreciate everyone joining us today. But a quick little background about Daniel. So he was a former registered professional appraiser and a certified chief appraiser, both with Comal County and Wilson County. Is that correct, Daniel?
Correct, yes, sir. I worked in land analysis, residential and agriculture in Comal County, and then also in Wilson County, I was assistant chief appraiser.
Excellent. And that, you did that for over a decade?
Yes, 11 years.
11 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. So a couple housekeeping items, folks. So just a few disclaimers here. We are not licensed tax advisors. We are not attorneys. We're not CPAs. We are not registered investment advisors. We just wanted to host this webinar just to help y'all learn from both Daniel's experience and our experience fighting our own property taxes. As I'm sure all of you have received or will shortly receive your property tax notification for your 2022 assessed value, and from what we're seeing, the values have gone up substantially. So obviously we're all getting a little sticker shock here. So it's a little frustrating, and I know the first time that I tried to protest my property taxes on my own, I really didn't even know where to begin. So this is just simply an educational webinar. Hopefully you can take what we teach you today and apply it for protesting your own property taxes. Please ask questions along the way, y'all. If you have any questions, we'll see them in the comments section. You don't need to wait until the end. So feel free to reach out to us and put them in the chat box, and we'll answer those as we see them come in. And at the end of this, we are recording this. So if you come in late or if you want to see a recording of this, feel free to reach out to us at landteam@landsaletx.com. Sale is spelled S-A-L-E, not S-E-L-L. Again, that's landteam@landsaletx.com. So it's about 12:03. Why don't we get started here? So again, this is my colleague, Daniel Tovar. I'm Casey Gorge. We're with Land Sale Texas. So Daniel, of course, 'tis the season for property tax notices, yes, right? So when can we expect to receive our notices here in Central Texas if we haven't already? Because I know I haven't for one of our properties.
Yes. So I haven't received mine either. I know one of our colleagues here has received theirs in Hays County. You are mandated by the state of Texas to send out your property tax notice as soon as applicable. Each county can vary depending on if they're still working on their valuations or doing some appraisals to be completed. So ultimately, the state of Texas states that the deadline is May 15th. The appraisal district is going to give you 30 days to protest that. They are legally binded by supplying 30 days for you to go in and fill your property tax protest out. However, if they don't give you the notice in a timely manner, as far as the deadline meeting May 15th, and that's less than 30 days, many times what they'll do is extend the deadline to protest. So key point is very important to look at your protest and see what the deadline is indicated on your notice. Typically it's at the top somewhere close to either your address or your property ID. So just be on the lookout for that, because different counties may have different deadlines in particular areas that they sent out, or it could just vary. So it's very important to keep in mind when your deadline is.
And of course, folks, the county is going to send that notice to whatever mailing address you have on file. So if your mailing address is a P.O. box, for example, check that frequently this time of year to make sure that you are getting it in a timely manner. So we'll dive into the process of how to protest and how to file all of that. But first, of course, we're getting these notifications, and we've been talking to a lot of folks in the community. Some of their values have gone up. I mean, one gentleman I saw, his value went up 56% year over year. So we're all experiencing sticker shock here. How does the appraisal district actually come up with these rates anyways? Because sometimes it seems arbitrary.
Yeah. So what they have to do is they're mandated to use the prior year's sales. So also, key point, Texas is a non-disclosure state. They may not have all the sales that occurred in their county. They are going to get those prices from either surveys they send out, deeds, just different methods of getting those prices. But they don't have every single sale. So they have to work the best as they can to piece together these values from the prior year sales. They'll look at the land component, see what raw land is selling for, and then also they're looking at the home sales as well. Also with businesses, any type of real estate sale that took place that they have record of, that's what they use from the prior year to come up with this year's current value.
So it's probably a good thing that they can't use 2022 sales, because obviously anyone who's been following the real estate market, you don't even need to follow it to know that it's absolutely crazy right now. It's kind of bananas what has taken place in, well, not just Central Texas, but throughout many of the Sun Belt states. So they cannot use any sales comps from 2022. It has to be the prior year. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
It has to be the prior year because they don't have enough sales from this year to actually see what happened in this whole calendar year. So.
Okay, perfect. And when they're looking at prior sales too, now specifically in regards to a homestead exemption, for those of the folks that don't know homestead exemption, can you explain that briefly, Daniel?
Yes.
Most people know what it is, and then talk, if you would, please. There's a cap on that in the state of Texas.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah, so real quick before we get into that, I want to go over also on your notice, you're going to have it's an exemption section, and it's going to detail what exemptions are actually on your property. So you want to make sure if that's your main homestead, you're getting your homestead exemption. Also, to a point that Casey touched on earlier was the addresses. So it is the property owner's responsibility to make sure that you have the current mailing address. So don't ever assume that they have the current address of whatever was on your deed. It could have been your prior address, and that's where all your mail is going to go. So it is the property owner's responsibility to make sure that's current. Getting into your homestead exemption. So you can apply for your homestead now. As of last year, they changed the law where you can actually apply once you move into the property. You need to have a current driver's license that states that your current address is where you live at, and that's how you will apply for your homestead exemption. That's the key factor to prove where you're staying at. So they allotted $25,000 for the homestead exemption, and currently there's another amendment to the state constitution that's recommending a $40,000 increase from that.
$40,000 total.
Yes, $40,000 total
Okay.
for your value, not on your taxes, on your value subtraction. So along those lines, the way the homestead exemption works is it prevents your value from going up more than 10% in 1 year. Okay, so that's not necessarily stating that your overall value can only go up 10%. It's stating that your liability of value is only going to go up 10%. And I'll use a quick example. So, for instance, if you have a 50% increase in 1 year, which many of us may have, maybe even more this year, you're only going to be liable for the 10% increase this 1 year. However, that doesn't mean that you're just going to be limited to the 10% because you still have 40% of the 50% increase. So the next year, it's going to go up another 10%. The next year, it's going to go up another 10% until it meets that full market value and is no longer capped. If the market continues to increase, then you're going to see the 10% every year. It's going to continue to go up. So that's what the homestead cap does. It's very common that folks think that it's just limited. Oh, my value can only go up 10%. Why did it go up 50%? Why did it go up 200%? The value can go up to whatever the market is indicating. It's just the homestead protects you for that year to only be liable for the 10% increase.
Thank you for clarifying that, Daniel. And this is why, folks, in our opinion, it's so important to stay on top and abreast of this information, and why we wanted to do this free webinar for all you folks out there is because, like Daniel said, it doesn't just mean that your value's not going up just 10%. So we always recommend that you protest your property taxes. Of course, again, we're not registered tax advisors, but you need to make that decision on your own. But of course, limiting your taxes is your legal right to do so. So we highly recommend it. Tor Hutchins came through with a question: how should easements across property impact the assessed value? So when you used to work for the counties, obviously if someone has a large transmission line easement going through their property, that dramatically affects their value in a negative way.
Correct.
Can you speak to that? Does the county look at that, and will they Are they that diligent with their criteria, Daniel?
So it's going to be, like I mentioned earlier, we don't have every sale that takes place in the state of Texas because it's non-disclosure. So what they'll try to do is look for a comparable sale. However, if there's no sale indicating, this property with a high power line easement sold for X amount less than the property next door that sold, that's going to be very arbitrary, but in fact, it is going to take away value from your property. The type of easement is also going to come into play because most properties have some type of easements on them, where it be an electrical underground easement, a pipeline easement, a water easement for the water line. Some of those aren't necessarily as impactful as your high power line overhead easement. So that would be a factor that you want to talk to them and see if they would consider making an adjustment for, because that is kind of insightly to have a big high power line easement versus a neighbor who doesn't have any of that obstructing their property.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And Tor, great question. Thank you. It looks like Archie has a question for us. Does the homestead exemption of 10% apply on the first year of new builds as well?
Okay, so that's a great question. So it works a little bit like depending on the percent complete. If you have a new home and it is at a percent complete as of January 1st, that's the most important date because all the appraisals are done as of January 1st. So however your property sits on January 1st, that's how it should be appraised. For instance, let's say construction didn't take place until January 2nd. That means that your property should only be taxed as raw land. Even though your house is going to be complete by the end of the year and you're going to be able to live in it, you should only be charged at a percent complete. If the house is there complete as of January 1st and that was your main residence as of January 1st, then you would qualify for a homestead exemption. Now, it used to be where you had to live on the property as of January 1st, but as I had mentioned prior, the law had changed. So now you can apply once you move in and you get your driver's license to indicate that that's your main residence.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, Archie, thank you. That's a great question. Javier just came in with a question. Can you claim homestead years after you bought and didn't realize you had the homestead exemption? This is a phenomenal question, Javier, and this is one of the points that I was going to mention later, but we'll jump into it. As a licensed real estate agent, I get really frustrated because I think that our industry, a lot of real estate agents don't take the time to educate themselves and then educate their clients. And so, we always encourage everyone to pursue every avenue you can. So with Javier's question, can you claim homestead years after you bought the property if you didn't realize that you could claim it?
Yeah, so you can actually go back 2 years on your homestead. That's the limitation on it. You can't go back prior. On your over 65 exemption, however, let's say you're 70 years old and you realize that you weren't claiming your over 65 exemption, you can actually go back to when you were 65 and apply. It'll go retroactive on that instance. But as far as your regular homestead, it's only going to be able to go back 2 years.
Back 2 years. Okay, thanks, Daniel. Javier, great question. And please, folks, keep the questions coming. We love that this is interactive, so we really appreciate everyone joining. So, Daniel, obviously, again, personally for our properties, we always try to fight our property taxes. And one caveat, folks, that I want to throw out here, if from my experience personally fighting them or I should say protesting is a better word, and Daniel's experience working for the county, keep in mind that, these folks at the county, they're human beings as well. They don't all have ill intent. So if you go in there guns blazing, I don't think it's going to go over well, right? Be respectful, do your homework, treat them like human beings. Daniel has told me some war stories of some landowners that were really, not the nicest of folks. And of course, that probably isn't going to come off the best way. So, we always try to protest our property taxes, but, doing your homework is vital in these situations. And again, keep in mind that they're just trying to do their jobs, but it is your legal right to protest your property taxes. So can we as property owners, Daniel, can we protest our taxes on our own? Obviously, there are a lot of companies that are out there that'll do that for us as well. And usually their business models are, they don't get paid unless they are successful for you. And usually I think it's around 30% from my experience. I've used several of the companies. One thing I will say though, after using several of those companies and then working closely with you, I've had mixed results with these companies. I'm not saying they're bad folks, but hopefully at the end of this webinar, we will equip you and arm you with enough information that you might be able to do this on your own. Mm-hmm. So can folks fight this or protest property taxes on their own? And if so, how does that work?
Yes, sir. So most folks, whenever you hire a property tax professional to fight on your behalf, what it is main thing is time. everybody's busy. We have families, we have jobs. You don't really have the time allotted to fight your property taxes. However, if you did, now they're making it a little bit easier for folks that are busy. You can protest online now, and you can correspond at your convenience. Maybe after work, or maybe put the kids to bed or something. So it's really the time, because everything that we're going to go over today is going to give you an insight as to all the checkpoints that these folks are going to look at as well. I'm going to be going over the whole process of what the sales are, how they are adjusted, and different points to make sure your property is in line with your neighbors and also with the market.
Okay.
So, in other words, yes, you can be very successful protesting your own property taxes if you have the time to do it.
Okay, and didn't you say, like, every now and then when some of these companies would come in, many times, because some of them have a churn and burn model, and again, these companies serve their purpose, folks. I had one that was successful for one of our properties, so by no means are we saying that you shouldn't use these companies, but sometimes they have a churn and burn model, and they might not do as much homework as the owner would on the property. And
exactly.
And in one case, you said they hadn't even viewed the property that
Correct.
They were protesting on behalf of. So, folks, do your homework, do your own due diligence, interview these companies, if you will. I think that's very important. We've had a few questions come in. Let me scroll up here, folks, so we can grab these questions before we dive into it here. Alrighty. Okay, so Alicia says, can we contest structure improvement market value as no improvements are done on the property, just that market price has gone up?
Okay, so it's a great question. A common misconception is whenever we say improvements, as far as on behalf of the appraisal district, an improvement is considered any structure that's on raw land. So basically, if you put a shed up, that's going to be considered an improvement to the land. It's not necessarily that you improve the structure itself. That's just what they're calling buildings. It's just a fancy way of saying building structures. They call them improvements. And these improvements have different classes, like you can have a home, you can have a shed, you can have a garage. All these different improvements have different classifications and valuations to them. So it's not necessarily that you made any improvements yourself in making the structure better. It's just that's what they consider structures, are called improvements.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, and great question. So Mike says, if I bought my house in 2021 and the prior owner had a homestead exemption, can they reset the value due to the sale, or can they only go up 10% from the prior owner's value?
So that's a great question, Mike. Once that person leaves, that homestead exemption is basically erased. It's taken off the property. There's no homestead exemption. When you apply and you move in and you get your own homestead exemption, it's going to be reset from that year. So you asked another thing about I believe it was you purchased a home in 2021.
Correct.
And you were asking about the value based off of your sale. They can't just look at your sale and mark it up to exactly what your sales price is. They have to consider the market. So let's say in a neighborhood, there's 20 houses that sold. They have to take all those sales in consideration and come up with an average of what that sales price for that neighborhood or market area is. So it's not just, it's one thing that we learned in our classes whenever I was going to the appraisal district courses. They said one sale does not make a market. So you have to consider all sales.
And again, that has to be the prior year sales.
Correct.
It has to be, in this case, it would have to be 2021. Or in Mike's case, if he bought it in 2021, then it would be 2020 sales.
And also, I would like to elaborate on that a little bit further. Some districts, I noticed that they'll accept, like if your sales price was less than what they have it currently valued at, you could just send your HUD statement in and they would adjust it. But not all appraisal districts do that. So it can vary appraisal district to appraisal district in different counties. But that may be something, if you purchase your home for lower than what they have it valued at, you may want to have a consideration of just having a call and see if they would like to accept that information. So
okay, and again, folks, Texas is a non-disclosure state. You are not required. And last time when I personally fought my property taxes or protested them, and I was actually successful with Daniel's help, but they flat out asked me what I paid for my property, and I respectfully declined. That is your legal right in Texas. You do not have to disclose that. So Daniel mentioning sending in your HUD, that can be a strategy if the HUD statement, the closing statement, shows that it's lower than what they have the value assessed at. Scotty has a question for us. He says, we have an older home on rural property. The home value went up 35% this year, but the home needs $60,000 in foundation repair and renovation to have any potential for that value. How do I present that case to the appraisers? And this is actually a great question, Scotty, because my home that I was just referring to, this was my homestead, and it had major foundation issues, and I took pictures of that and submitted those. And we'll actually, Scotty, we'll answer your question here when we go through the process of sending pictures to the appraisal district. But yeah, that's a great question, Scotty. So we'll walk through that. We'll definitely answer that for you. Now, let's see. I think we had one more question come in. Claudia says, if the homestead exemption is effective January 1st, is the 10% appraisal liability cap effective for that same year?
Yeah, so that now with the new law that changed where you can apply whenever you move in, it's going to be applicable. I don't know if it's going to be for that 1 year, because when you're buying that house and you're establishing the value, there's not really anything. There's not been an increase since you've claimed your homestead on there. I would say that I would refer you to your local appraisal district to see how, with the new law, with it being where you can apply any from any date that you moved in, how that comes in effect. It may have changed, so I would say that you need to probably go back to the appraisal district and see what the update is and how that affects in regards to your question.
Excellent, Daniel, and great question, Claudia. Daniel, what is the best way to approach the appraisal district and get in touch with these folks? Is there a specific person? Do you need to speak with the chief appraiser? Getting the main appraiser, or the assistant chief appraiser, is that better? Because trying to get the chief appraiser on the phone is probably a futile
Correct. Yeah,
attempt, right?
Typically in these larger appraisal districts, you're not going to be able to talk to the chief or the assistant chief.
Like Travis County, good luck, folks. You're not getting in touch with them, right?
You can typically ask the ladies up front, whoever answers the phone. They typically can help you with your homestead questions. If they can't, they might have a in-house homestead or exemption specialist, they call them. That's who you probably want to talk to. So you can ask whoever answers the phone and see if they can help you, or ask for the exemptions. Either they call them exemptions clerk, exemption specialist. There's various titles, but you can just ask for whoever deals with the exemptions, and they should be able to point you in the right direction.
Excellent. One more question just came in from Brenda real quick before we go into the actual process of protesting. So Brenda says, how do new builds work? So closed in May 2021 and appraisal was $345,000. Tax appraisal is now $465,000, almost a 35% increase. Can I fight for the 10% cap?
Okay, so that may be something also to talk, like we had mentioned with your HUD statement, that may be a good piece of evidence depending on what county you're in, to see if they're accepting that value as a fact. There's not going to be a better comp than your own home, that what you just purchased at. As in regards to the 10% cap, like I said, that's going to be something that I would direct you to the your local county appraisal district to see if that's something that they can apply with the new rule that just came in. Be completely honest, I don't know all the details of the new legislation that allows you to apply at any point in time. I just know that you don't have to wait till January 1st anymore. So I would direct you to your local appraisal district to answer that question for you.
Yeah, excellent question, Brenda. Thank you. All right, so Daniel, we've decided that we're going to protest this on ourselves here. So what are the first steps? Explain to folks the first steps of how that process would work.
Okay, so you, along with your notice of the appraised value, you also probably have a protest form in there with the paperwork that they sent you. I always recommend to folks, even if you don't want to protest, or if you are just wanting to go in, I would suggest you fill out that protest form, because that's going to lock you in, and you won't be past the date of where you can't protest anymore. Basically, you can't do anything. I always recommend folks to protest, file it, go in there, and that way you have the right to protest your value. That would be your first step. And then you mentioned the next process.
Well, before we jump into that, one caveat, folks: if you are sending in a physical paper, a document, do not send it, in my opinion, do not send it via snail mail unless you trust the U.S. Postal Service, because if it doesn't arrive to the appraisal district, that's your fault ultimately. So we always recommend sending via certified mail, or they can do it online, right? Do you recommend they do both?
If you're going to do it online, that should be satisfactory, because you're going to get an immediate response from whoever that acknowledged that you sent in your protest. If you are going to mail it in, I would suggest, like Casey said, certified mail, or go in person if you have the time to go actually physically drop it off.
Yeah, even better. And get a receipt, folks. If you go in and do it in person, get a receipt. If you do it online, take screenshots that say that it was confirmed that they receive it. always keep diligent records of this stuff. Because again, if it ever comes down to he said, she said, who do you think's going to win, right?
Yeah,
the county appraisal district, right? So always just protect yourself, right? All right, so Daniel, and I believe we already touched on, what about folks who have a newly constructed home? We already answered that question. So to the gentleman's question about the condition of it, if it needs repairs or if there is noticeable physical depreciation, it's has accelerated beyond normal wear and tear, how does that work?
All right, so once you file your protest and you're looking around your house and you say, man, my house went up, but it needs, let's say it needs some paint, it needs damaged, you have let's say a pipe busted and you haven't been able to repair it. Let's say you have some foundation issues like Casey did. What you want to do is document all the issues that you have to your home. Anything in your mind that detracts value from your home, in your opinion, you need to document it. Take some pictures of it, explain what's going on. Also, it can help. It can be very helpful to get some quotes, like the foundation again. If you're going to get a quote of cost of repair for this foundation, take that in so you can show, hey, I have $60,000 worth of repairs to get done, and y'all are saying that it's worth X amount more. Can something be adjusted here? I have issues with my home. So the most important thing is just to consider what you think is a detraction of value to your home and document it, whether it be pictures, quotes. I think you can take like a video to show if there's something wrong with fixtures in your home or something like that. But just keep in mind also, you're either going to have hard copies to leave at the appraisal district, or you're going to have to put everything on a USB drive to leave at the appraisal district. You can't really present anything from your phone because they'll have to keep whatever device that you're going to present evidence on, because they have to have record to show, hey, we made this adjustment because of the damages. Here's the evidence that they provided us. So you always want to keep that in mind. Have something to present that you can leave with the appraisal district.
Yeah, and Daniel, you brought up a good point, having like a third party appraisal or inspection. So the gentleman that had foundation issues, most foundation repair companies at least in the Austin area, and I think it goes the same in San Antonio, DFW, Houston, all throughout Central Texas, they will typically do foundation inspections for free. Mm-hmm. So if you have an unbiased third party analysis on the property, that would probably go a long way as well, right?
Yes. One of the other things that I would like to mention as well, if you're going to use an appraisal, you're going to have to get appraisal that is going to be accepted, like from a fee appraisal standpoint or something, because you'll see on your HUD statement whatever the reason the appraisal is done for, it'll state if it's done specifically for your loan, it's not going to be applicable at the appraisal district. They're gonna go through the appraisal and it's going to say for purposes of financing or purposes of whatever the case may be. If it's not directly for an appraisal to see what's wrong with your home, like a fee appraisal, it's probably not going to be subject to consideration.
Okay. What if someone's house is in perfect shape, but they still feel like the appraisal district overvalued their property? How would they go about that?
Yeah, so in that instance, there's going to be two different avenues you can take. You're going to want to talk to maybe your local real estate agent, maybe the person who helped you buy the house, and get some comps from the prior year to see what these sales are. Another point to keep in mind is, even if you do have comps, they're not going to be a straight line comparison. They're not just going to say, oh, well, this house sold for this one. There's going to be a lot of adjustments that are made. So whenever you go to your informal protest to sit down your one-on-one and talk with an appraiser, you're going to ask for a detailed sales comparison grid, and it'll have all the adjustments they made per segment of your home, the square footages, because ultimately what they do is all the comps that are used to justify value are going to be adjusted to be the same as your subject property, as your property itself. So I'll give you a simple term. Let's say this house sold for $100,000 and your house sold for $90,000, but this had a garage and yours didn't have a detached garage. They're going to take that one segment of the home and remove that value, and then it'll be you can say apples to apples, because the houses are now just a house and a house, not a house with a garage. So ultimately what they're trying to do is adjust all the
it via the physical form, but again, send it via certified mail or drop it off physically in person and get a receipt of confirmation. Mm-hmm. At what point do folks actually send the documentation for evidence?
So typically what you'll do is, when you file your protest, if you're doing it online, I know most folks will they'll give you an option to include any documents with your online protest. You would do it there. In the instance of a one-on-one, you can bring the evidence with you when you sit down with an appraisal district representative. It's always good to bring some kind of evidence. You don't want to just show up and have an opinion, hey, I don't think my house is worth this, and then they have all this evidence to show to justify their value, and you're sitting there still not agreeing. You may not have a case because you don't have any evidence to present to anybody. Like Casey mentioned, these folks are humans too. They're doing their job, and they have to have some kind of record as to why they made adjustments, because their boss is going to say, why did you adjust this? There's no evidence. You didn't have anything to justify. Why did you do this? So the evidence is going to be required. I'd like to also point out, we had mentioned sales, bringing sales. The other avenue you could go is equity. An equity protest is going to be making sure that you're valued the same as your neighbors in your neighborhood, on your street. Same type of houses should be valued the same. So that's your other method of protest. And you'll have your sales method, which would be your market approach, and then you have your equity method, which is ensuring that everything is in line with your neighbors as well. And you can protest multiple different points during your protest. It doesn't have to just be market value. It doesn't have to just be equity. It could be both of them. I would suggest, checking every single one that you feel applies to your property, so you don't shortchange yourself in not being able to protest equity because you just marked market. So that's very important as well.
And Daniel, can we request what comps they used to determine the value of our property?
Yes, when you're doing your informal protest, you can request I want all the evidence that's used to come up with my value, and they should be able to present to you whatever they use, whether it be these sales grids or whatever method you decide to protest, whether it be equity, sales, or both. They'll have to provide you that information. I always try to say that would be most beneficial to folks to get that on your informal, because then if you still don't agree, like when you're one-on-one, you can talk, you can present information, you may be able to get an adjustment made with the appraisal there. Even if they make an adjustment and you don't agree with it, you still want to get your value or your evidence that they presented to you, so you can take that home and build your own defense when you decide to go to the formal protest.
Yeah, and as a property owner, we can provide comps as well, correct? In the evidence package, that's correct.
That
right?
is correct. And
okay.
Just like I mentioned, though, just keep in mind it's not a straight line comparison. They are going to make adjustments to your subjects.
And folks, the same thing goes for land too. If you have any evidence, for example, if your land is encumbered, 70% of it is encumbered by the floodplain. If it's in an area for an endangered species, that actually affects the value sometimes. Easements, like that gentleman said earlier. So any information and evidence you can provide, absolutely provide that when you submit your protest notification. Absolutely. Correct. And in the case when I fought the property taxes on my homestead, I requested the comps that they were using to determine the value of my property. And when I looked up all of these comps, and I found most of them on Zillow as well, but when I looked them up, they had all been remodeled, and my house was still, built in 1984, I believe, and it was still older. So I presented that evidence, and that was one of the main reasons I was able to successfully lower my assessed value, because all the comps that they were using were homes that had been remodeled. Mm-hmm. So, it's important that you exercise your legal right to get the comps and then provide your own comps as well.
In case you want to hit some questions, so there were some that pertain to like comps and different things.
Absolutely. All right. So, here we go. So Alicia says, can we use property taxes, homes around you are paying as comps instead of market value?
Yes. So that would be equity, Alicia. That would be your equity argument. That's how you would look at it. Now, also in that same token, you need to keep in mind that homes, even if they're on the same street or the same neighborhood, can be classed differently due to size, construction, whether it be like you could say like hardy plank siding versus brick and stucco. That's going to be a different classification. So that's going to be something else to keep in mind. You can go to the appraisal district website, look at your neighbor's house, and they should have a segment to the classification of the home, just so when you're looking at it, you're picking homes that are the same class as yours.
Yeah, and another caveat I want to throw out, if you are providing your own comps as evidence, make sure that they're realistic comps. For example, if it's a home, make sure that the comps you're supplying as evidence is within 300 square feet plus or minus. It's relatively close, same number of bedrooms, same number of bathrooms, same total yard size or area of the home, of the property. Also, single story compared to 2 stories. those differences are gonna, they're gonna help you.
Yes.
But if you use a comp for a home that was 800 square feet, but yours is 3,000 square feet, they're not going to take you seriously. So again, right, like do your homework,
Yep.
make sure that, and even bring that up. When I submitted my evidence, I said, look, here are comps that are 300 plus or minus square feet, same number of bedrooms, same number of bathrooms, same number of total acreage for the property size, same single story versus single story. So that's super important. Archie says, is express inquiry the same as protest?
That may be something that's newer depending on the size of the appraisal district. Express inquiry, I think that may be like more of an informal meeting that you're not protesting, you're just going in there inquiring. So the difference is you can go and you can do an inquiry, right? And you're talking to them. But if you leave the building and you don't fill out your protest form and you don't get it in by the deadline, that's it for you. You're not going to be able to go forward. So that's why I always mention to folks, you want to fill out your protest and get that in there and get your assurance that you'll be able to protest, go forward. Because a lot of times you'll go to this informal inquiry, you'll meet with them, they'll go over the property, you may not agree, you leave, you get busy with life, you forget, and then you're calling and it's past the deadline and you're like, what do you mean I can't protest anymore? That's very common. That's happened plenty of times in my 10 years of experience in the appraisal district in Wilson County where I was at. We would always just recommend filling out the protest so you're not in that situation. So.
Okay. And Tor Hutchins says, my raw land value went up over 50%. If Texas is non-disclosure state, how do you get info for comps for, comparable sales? And then there was another question that asked if the appraisal district has access to the MLS. Legally, they are not supposed to have access to the MLS. So
they do not.
Sometimes agents will give them access if they're friends of someone at the appraisal district, which is highly illegal.
Yeah, exactly.
So you got to be careful with that. Yeah, but
and Tor, just like you said, it depends. They're going to get it from deeds. They're going to get it from surveys. You may have got something in the mail if you had a recent purchase, and it's going to say, "Hey, what did you buy your property for?" Mm-hmm. So some letters like that. They go do deed research. They do get some sales from, like Casey was saying, maybe they have real estate friends or something they can get sales from. They're not supposed to, but I mean that's the only avenue to get, because
sometimes they do it. And Tor, if you're trying to find comps for yourself to use as evidence, almost everyone knows a real estate agent that can probably help them to get access to the MLS. The tricky part about land is that there really aren't that many comps listed on Zillow or Redfin. Those are mainly for residential properties, your typical small single family homes in a high density residential subdivision. So if you're trying to get comps for land as evidence, just ask around, just be super diligent, and just have tenacity when approaching something like this, because it is important. Because especially when it comes to land valuation is more of an art than a science, in my opinion. And so you're going to request the comps that the county used, and you might find that, hey, one of those comps, actually yours has more floodplain than those other comps. There are free maps, FEMA floodplain maps you can find, so you can look stuff up like that. You can see if yours has easements and the other ones don't, etc. But that's a really good question. So Jared, go ahead.
I was just saying, Casey, if we'd like to piggyback off of Tor's comment about raw land with the ag valuation as well. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that me and Casey were discussing is when you have raw land that's under ag valuation, of course you're paying on your productivity value, not your market value, which is substantially lower than full market value. The other, you may not protest it because you're like, well, I'm only paying $100, $200 on my property because it's ag exempt, but the value's going up. So what you can get yourself into if you don't protest that and keep your values in line, if you go to sell, or if you pass it down to your family members and they decide they don't want to do ag, they're going to be paying at a higher premium. So it's important to keep that in line as well. You always want to protest your ag value, even if you think, it's only a couple $100 that I have to pay, even though my value went to $2 million, I still only have to pay a couple $100, so it's no big deal. It could be a big deal down the road. So just something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And if you ever have land that is one day, the highest and best use is for a development of some sort, many developers or investors will require the landowner to pay the rollback taxes because they have gained from the benefit of super low taxes. So even more reason why it's so important to always protest, in our opinion. Again, do your own research, hire a specialist, but it's best to, in our opinion, to always protest your property taxes. Jared has a question. What about homestead exemption when land is inherited from family? Well, that kind of leads into that question quite well.
Yeah.
Or if it's gifted.
Yeah. So either way, inherited or gifted, your exemption is personal. So whoever owns that land, anytime there's a deed change of ownership or any kind of deed change, that would trigger the appraisal district to remove all exemptions, and that would require whoever owns the property now to refile for their own exemption. So your exemptions are very much personal to that person, whoever owned the property and whoever filed those exemptions. So they come off if there's a deed change. That's kind of how the appraisal district will keep track of. Okay, we see the deed change came in. We're gonna have to change ownership, and while we're doing that, we're gonna remove all exemptions and require the new owner to reapply.
Excellent. Yeah, another good question, y'all. So Hiren Patel says, what time frame does the county base their values? For example, if I pull comps. So so it's the prior year,
yeah,
correct?
it would be the prior year, and sometimes you can use like maybe January or February of the current year, but the prior year sales would be the best to use.
Because that's what the county
That's what the
uses.
county uses. Yes.
Yep. So yeah, Hiren, you made another comment. If I pull comps now, they are higher versus maybe last year. Yes, they are absolutely higher. 2022 comps are going to be substantially higher than 2021. But again, legally, the county cannot use those. Is that correct? They have to use the prior year.
Yeah, and I will say too, if you're going to do your comps, you may want to cherry pick your comps that support your case, because believe the appraisal district is going to cherry pick their comps to support their value. So
Absolutely. Y'all, if you're going to provide evidence as comps, when I did my homestead, I did comps that were very rough homes, but they were still of equal square footage and number of bedrooms and baths and single story versus single story. So again, the county, they're diligent. They're going to call you out on something that they see as a little nefarious on your part, so to speak. Alrighty, Daniel. So we filed the protest form, and then so we're going to provide evidence at that point. So what is the next step after that? I believe it's the informal.
Yes.
If you elect to do informal. So you have two choices,
Yeah,
correct?
you have two choices from the get-go. You can do an informal, which you would go ahead and sit down, or if you can do it via online, you'll be chatting with the appraisal district representative. You go back and forth and ask, this is where you want to ask for the evidence. What are y'all using to support my value? They will show you some instances. They'll pull a sales comparison grid, and it'll say, oh, yeah, this shows that we can justify lowering the value X amount. And then they'll talk with you about it and see if you agree. If you agree, they will then print out what's called a settlement waiver, or if online, I'm sure they'll send it to you digitally, but it's called a settlement waiver. And once you sign that paper, that's agreeing to the value that is on that paper set by the appraisal district that they were able to adjust down, and you were agreeing to it. Once you sign that, your ability to protest is done. You're signing that, you're agreeing to that value, and you can't take it any further from that point. So it's very important that if you do get a settlement waiver, make sure that you really agree with that value before you sign it. So that would be your first step.
And that's the informal.
That's the informal
and
process.
you can elect to skip that if you want to go straight to the formal hearing, correct?
Yeah, yes.
But do you recommend doing the informal?
I always recommend doing the informal for two reasons. One, you may be able to get an adjustment right there, one-on-one, low pressure, talking to another individual. And two, you're going to be able to get your information as to what they're using to value your property. So then, if you do decide to go to the next step, you have that information to build a case for yourself and be a little bit more educated into what they're using. That way you can then put together a good defense and, kind of go fight, for lack of better terms, fight what they're saying and be a little bit more informed instead of just going in there with your evidence and not seeing what they have presented. So.
Okay. And Daniel instructed me to do that on my homestead, folks, and I went through the informal process. Of course, I filled out the protest form online, and I also sent it via certified mail, just as, a fail-safe, if you will. And then I did the informal process, and I did not agree with the value. They were actually firm with their value, and I said I disagree, and I got everything in writing. They follow up with an email to you saying, okay, no conclusion was made, so now we're going to move to the formal hearing. And we just got a question that actually is another good segue. So Haley says, after the protest is completed, how long does the result stand? So Haley, I'm going to turn that into two questions. So after you file the initial protest form, and then you wait for the informal and then wait for the hearing, the actual formal hearing. I mean, mine took months, Daniel. So how long do they legally have to take? Is there a certain time frame with that?
There's not really a certain time frame.
Does it have to be in the same calendar year, though?
No, it can be.
Wow.
I mean,
okay.
If you're looking at bigger counties like Travis, Bexar County, HCAD, Houston, they go into the next year. I mean, whenever you have that load of folks protesting, like I have a feeling everybody's going to want to protest this year because of all the increases, they're going to have those hearings going on probably year round.
Mm-hmm.
It's just fact of the matter, there's not that many appraisal district members, representatives to handle the amount of folks that they're dealing with. So it's just going to be a lengthy process on that.
Okay. And then Haley, your last question was, will we need to protest year after year? Unfortunately, I think that's the name of the game if you want to keep your property taxes low. We always will look into protesting on all of our properties. We just think it's good financial acumen, if you will. So I think that's a personal question for you and your family, Haley. If you agree with the new assessed value year over year, then maybe it's not worth your time to protest it. But these counties sometimes are very aggressive in raising the values, and it's unfortunate. But you can legally exercise your right to do it. So,
and I will say, Haley, also what you can do, and we'll go over this a little bit more detail. But the next step when you do a formal protest and the appraisal review board sets your value, that value is supposed to stay for 2 years unless they totally revalue your neighborhood or your street. Then they can change it in 1 year. But like, let's say that they just revalued your whole neighborhood, you went in and you protested and you got a determination from the appraisal review board, then that value should stay for 2 years unless they totally reappraise your neighborhood again the following year.
Okay, great. Thank you for the questions, Haley. Jen Hurst says, where is the best place to find comps? Again, Jen, and that's, one great thing about Texas is it's a non-disclosure state. One not so great thing about Texas as a consumer when you're trying to find comps, it's a non-disclosure state. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. The best place is probably to speak with a realtor that you know. I think just in Travis County alone, there are over 16,000 realtors or real estate agents. So just do your homework, be diligent. If this is important to you, just be tenacious and you'll figure a way out. But typically the best comps are found on the MLS, of which you cannot get access to unless you know someone who's a licensed agent or you're a licensed agent yourself. Scotty Backus says, please mention validating details in appraisal details. We have found errors in square footage, a second floor and fireplace that doesn't exist, etc. Scotty, this is a phenomenal point. And this should, think about it, folks. Is any government association or government body perfect? That's a rhetorical question, but of course not. Everyone makes mistakes. We've made mistakes before. So yes, Scotty, that is a phenomenal point. Always double check what they're saying, not only your assessed value, but the details of your property. For example, acreage. We found major discrepancies sometimes where the county will say it's 100 acres, but it's actually 95 acres. Do you think that will affect your value?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And good point, Scotty. I'll go ahead and go through a list of things just to keep in mind. So you're mentioning, square footage. You want to look at the classification of your home. Make sure it's classified correctly. Each appraisal district has categories and how they class homes, and you want to make sure that your house is classed appropriately to what they're saying the category is. You're going to look at your depreciation. There's percentage depreciation on your home if it's like after new build, there should be depreciation being attached. If you have like a 20-year-old home, there should be a percentage that's applied to natural depreciation on that. There's a few different things. You can have your physical depreciation, your economic depreciation, and it's something just to ask your appraiser when you're sitting in front of them. Just make sure that those are accounted for. Also, Scotty mentioned, make sure your square footage is correctly listed. I will say that if you're looking at blueprint square footage versus what your actual appraisal says, it's going to be different. And the reason being is this appraisal district is going to be measured from the exterior of the wall, and typically blueprints are drawn from the interior of the wall. So there could be a size discrepancy in your blueprints versus what the appraisal district is stating. Something to keep in mind as well.
And that's actually a really good point. Someone made a comment on that earlier. So legally, the appraisal district cannot come in your home, folks, but they can come on your property. Is that correct?
Correct.
So
yes.
if you have a large land holding, they are legally able to come on your property. Of course, we're in Texas. We love our guns. So
it depends. I've worked with appraisers that go in. If the gate's not locked, they'll open it, go in. Me personally, I never did that. That's just something that I the gate's closed for a reason. I'll send that person a postcard or something to try to set up a meeting. But yeah, they can do that if they choose to.
But they can't come in your home. But you can still provide evidence from pictures taken inside your home.
Yes.
So that works to your benefit.
Yeah, and it kind of goes kind of twofold. Like, they're going to appraise from exterior and they don't know the condition of your home. So if you're looking at your new appraised value and you're saying, why is this go up so much? My house and the inside has all these issues. They're unaware of that. So you're going to have to document it and take that in and show them. I'm just trying to think of other things, like you said. Yeah, the fireplaces. Make sure that they're like your sheds are classified property, your garages are classified property. I know, like if you can build a metal building and you can build it with different types of iron, you can do your prefabricated, pre-engineered metal buildings, your steel pipe metal building, or I've even seen some that are wood framed on the inside, but they're metal on the exterior. So those are all different price per square foot. Is there a slab underneath the building? They're saying there's a slab underneath. Different aspects like that. You want to make sure that everything about your home is exact on your appraisal.
That's a really good point. All right, so Daniel, we filed the protest form, we did the informal hearing, and we didn't agree with their value.
Right.
So what's next? That's the formal protest, right?
Yes.
How do we prepare ourselves for this? Is this like what we've seen on TV, where you can't handle the truth and it's high stakes, or how does that process work?
So most folks they don't. From what I've heard, just in my experience, they don't like to go to the next level, to the formal protest, because they think, oh, I'm going to go to this board and they're all affiliated with the appraisal district. That's far from the truth. The appraisal review board is comprised of volunteers from the county that are actually volunteering their time to sit on these boards. They're going to be, school teachers. They may be business owners, farmers. Different folks. They're just like you. They pay taxes in the county as well.
So they're completely separate from the appraisal district.
They're completely separate from the appraisal district. You go in there and you state your case. The appraisal district states their case. There may be some rebuttal in between. Everybody presents their evidence, and then the board will talk amongst themselves to come up with a determination of value. Also beforehand, it's not just like, hey, they're going to call you and say, hey, you have to come in tomorrow. The appraisal district is legally obligated to give you a 15-day notice before your hearing date, and you're only allowed one reschedule. After that, you cannot reschedule anymore unless it's like something super dire, that you were in a car accident or something like that, where you physically could not attend, to the best of your abilities. And then you'd also have to show proof of that, like doctors saying that that you were in the hospital at this point in time, and things like that. So you're only allowed one reschedule, and that's where you're going to go in. That's your next level. So like I mentioned before, you have this time. Like Casey said, it was a couple months before he was able to get in there. You're going to have this time to present or prepare a good defense to these appraisal review board members, and you're going to have your information that you requested already for what they're going to show. So they can't change that, or they're not supposed to. Once they provide you a sales comparison grid, that should be the same evidence that's presented in your hearing. Because in other words, that they can't just change it on you. If they print it out to you and they say, this is what we're going to present, and then you go in and it's something different, they shouldn't be allowed to do that. It should be, they call it like making the comparison grid static, to where you can't change it anymore. So.
And does the appraisal review board, do they have any prior details of your property before that meeting?
No. So once you walk into that the appraisal review board, they have no idea about your property. The appraisal district representative is going to introduce your property, say where it's at, say what kind of property you're looking at, say what your reason for protest is, and that's going to be the first time the appraisal review board hears any details about your property. So they do that so you can't be biased.
Okay. And would you recommend, if the counties are allowing that formal process to happen in person? Obviously, COVID has put a monkey wrench in a lot of in-person meetings. But would you recommend doing it in person?
Yes, I would recommend doing it in person, just for the fact that if you choose to present over the phone, you can't really tell what's being shown on the screen or what the appraisal district is trying to show. They're just going to have to verbally go over it with you, and you're going to have to kind of rebut that over the phone, and it's not very applicable. I would say you have a better chance to do it in person, so you can actually see what's going on in the room, see the body language, see people's faces and how they're reacting to the evidence. So I would say it's very beneficial to go in person if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that, folks. In person is so much better. You can read body language. They can see how you present yourself. Obviously, we recommend go in there looking fairly clean cut. I think that makes a difference. Yeah. And just be professional. And again, these are human beings on the other side. They're just trying to do their jobs as well. So be respectful. I subscribe to the philosophy of be firm but fair, right? If you're asking for a 40% reduction, they're probably going to laugh you out of the building. So I think you need to be somewhat realistic as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, most definitely. And you just for sure 100% want to have some kind of evidence, because if you're going to that level of protesting, the appraisal district representative is going to have a wealth of evidence to present. And if you just walk in there with an opinion, it's not going to go your way.
And you can't supply new evidence at that point, right?
Correct.
It has to, and
Yeah.
I think we might have talked on, I don't know if we touched on that.
Yeah,
but you cannot supply new evidence at the formal hearing. Is that correct?
So appraisal districts are going to want to have a copy of your evidence beforehand. You want to check with your local appraisal district to see what their stipulations are. I mean, it can vary. They're going to say we need to have this 5 days before your hearing date so we can review it. Myself personally, I've been thrown in all kinds of situations where it's like the first time I'm seeing the evidence is in the hearing. So, I mean, it just happens sometimes. But you want to check with your appraisal district to see what their standards are, because they can say, oh, well, you didn't give it to us in an amount of time, so you can't present anything. And you don't want to get into a situation. So, again, they do send paperwork. It should say, what they're expecting. But if you have any additional questions, feel free to give them a call and have them elaborate.
Absolutely. So what happens if we don't come to an agreement during the formal process?
So
do we have other avenues that we can pursue?
So you have one more avenue that you can go to the next level. What you're going to do is you're going to get a letter in the mail, and it's going to be a order of determination. Basically, it's saying this is what took place in your hearing, and this is what the value the appraisal review board set. And from that point, once you get that letter, you have 60 days to then either go file for district court or arbitration. There's going to be fees involved, and the timeline, it could vary county to county, so I would refer you to your local appraisal district to talk with them if you do decide to go to district court or arbitration, to see what the fees are and what the timeline looks like on that. But that is, once that's the final step. You go in. If you're going to go to district court, I would suggest you talk with an attorney just to make sure you have a case before you go to that link. Arbitration is a little bit more informal. You're going to have a list of arbitrators, and the appraisal district is going to pick, you're going to pick, and then y'all come to agreement on who you want to use. And typically arbitrations take place in a neutral environment, like it could be like a community center, a library. Sometimes the appraisal district has a separate room that they'll use. It just depends on the county. But once you get to that point, the arbitration's a little bit more informal. You can represent yourself, and you can represent yourself in district court too as well. You just want to make sure that you have something solid if you're going to go that route.
Okay. And of course, folks, I mean, if you're getting to the point where you're entertaining the idea of actually going to district court, choose your battles wisely. If we're talking, savings of a few $100s, it makes no sense to hire an attorney and go to district court, right? Yeah. Probably just swallow the pill and bite your tongue and move on. But so Daniel, what are some of and we're about ready to wrap this up, folks, so if you have any further questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen individuals make, or even the companies that folks hire, when they try to protest these property taxes?
So I'm going to go over real quick, maybe not necessarily the biggest mistakes, but something real easy to check that is very beneficial to save you a couple $100s right off the bat. Make sure your exemptions are in place. I know I said it at the very beginning, but that's important.
Absolutely.
Make sure you have your homestead exemption. If you're a disabled person, see if you have your disabled person exemption on there. See if you have your over 65 exemption on there. If you're a disabled veteran, there's different tiers. You want to make sure that you have your disabled veteran exemption on there. If you're 100% disabled veteran, you can get what's called disabled veteran homestead. And that means you don't pay any property taxes at all due to the injuries you received, performing service to our country. So those are the easiest ways to check and see if you can get a couple $100s knocked off right off the bat, just making sure that you have the correct exemptions in place. Another thing, just mistakes that folks make, is just coming in with no evidence. I mean, it's very hard for, even if you're talking to one-on-one with an appraiser and you don't have anything, even if they want to help you, they can't really do anything because they don't have anything to justify. And, everybody has to pay their bills. I'm not going to, put my job on the line to help somebody I don't know if I wouldn't do that for my own grandmother, So make sure you have evidence. Another thing, too, just to be aware, you're going to know your property better than the appraisal district, or even the, if you hire a property tax professional to protest, you're going to know your property better. You're going to know what it does throughout the year. If you have like seasonal drainage, maybe you have pictures of one time it flooded, you couldn't believe how high the water came, you took pictures of it. Bring that stuff in. That's all going to be applicable. You want to check for adjustments. I mentioned drainage. There's different adjustments. You can have your drainage. As the gentleman mentioned earlier, make sure if you have a high power line, they may be able to make an adjustment for that. If there's erosion on your property, maybe you have a big culvert that spits out right in front of your yard and that water just drains right into your front yard every time it rains. There's different things like that to keep in consideration. Like I mentioned, you just want to very, very detail oriented of what detracts value to your home. just keep that in mind when you're walking through everywhere, looking at all the cracks, looking at settling, looking at whatever repairs need to be made. You need to keep an open mind, write this list down, document it, say what's going on if you're having issues. I find a lot of times folks will just forget that stuff, and then they get there and we get into conversation. They're like, oh, I have this and this and this wrong with my house, and they didn't bring any evidence in, but it's after the fact because they weren't aware of what they needed to bring in the first place. So it's very important just to document and be prepared to show something to back up your opinion. Hey, I don't believe it's worth this because here's all my evidence showing why not. I would say that's like the most important things. And also, to get your protest in before the deadline. I can't stress that enough, because if you miss it by one day, that's it. You're done for the year. You can write a letter to the appraisal review board, but it has to be something dramatic that caused you not to be able to protest within 30 days. If you were out of the country due to a military service or something like that, you could probably get something done on that end. But yeah, it's just very important to get that protest in before the deadline.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Daniel. And one thing I wanted to really touch on again, if there are any licensed real estate agents watching this, again, I'm licensed as well. We have a fiduciary duty to our clients to inform them of these things. Now, I'm not saying go and fill out the form for them. The landowner or the property owner needs to do that. But Daniel, you spent 11 years working for the county appraisal district, whether Comal County or Wilson County. In 11 years, how many real estate agents called you to ask you questions on this very topic that we're talking about?
I could say probably like seven.
Seven.
I counted them. I counted them. So
Seven.
Me personally, I've only talked to 7 people in 11 years that called real estate agents.
7 real estate agents called him in 11 years. I mean, that's appalling to me. We have a fiduciary duty to our clients. So real estate agents, I highly recommend you educate yourselves. And as a real estate agent, most of the commission is always the same, right? Whether they're talking to someone else or talking to us. So how do you differentiate yourself? It's by bringing as much value as possible. So educate yourself, folks. It's so important, whether you're a real estate agent or a property or landowner. So just to recap real quick, Daniel, the steps, and I hope this has provided a lot of value and information to all the folks that joined us today, and thank you for staying on. I know we're going a little bit past an hour here, but it's really easy once you distill it. It's just 4 or 5 steps. You file your protest online, or you do it via certified mail, or both, or do it in person. Again, keep records of everything. Then you present evidence as well with your protest. Then you go to the informal hearing, which you recommend. So That's the second step. If you don't agree with the informal hearing, then you go to the formal hearing in front of the appraisal review board.
Yep, the volunteers.
And the volunteers that have no affiliation.
Yep.
Yeah,
no, these are your peers. They're just like me and Casey. We can go. Anybody can go send a letter in and volunteer and see if you can get selected to be on these appraisal review boards. It's simple as that. You have to just write a letter in, and they're gonna pick indiscriminately. Whoever they can fit in there or they feel is the best fit. I believe either the county judge or some of the municipalities would be doing the selections, not the appraisal district themselves. But yeah, they're just regular folks. I know I've talked to a lot of folks that kind of get nervous about going in there, and I just always tell them, even working at the appraisal, it's all right. I'm going to present my evidence. I'm not going to attack you or anything. And these folks are your peers. They're not going to attack you either. We're just here. Present your evidence, I present mine, and it is what it is. It's not personal. So
yeah. And from my personal experience, folks, when I did my informal hearing, and that was with a gentleman at the appraisal district, he was very cold, very firm, very short, and I disagreed with him, and I elected to go to the formal hearing, and that was in front of the appraisal review board, which Daniel said it's volunteer based. And those folks, it was 3 gentlemen. They were super friendly, and I was able to reduce my property taxes significantly. So it's probably worth it to go through all those steps. So again, it sounds like it's just 4 steps. Or if you don't agree with the appraisal review board, then you go to either arbitration or district court, which at that point, again, pick your battles wisely. It might not be worth it, especially if it's a single family home. Correct. If we're talking a multi-million-dollar commercial property, and you have the means to do it, it might make more sense, because those values can vary greatly.
I will say there is a cap on the amount of value that you can protest or arbitrate. I believe it's $5 million. But again, you want to check with your local appraisal district to see what that value is. It may have changed. Like I said, I've been out of the business for 2 years now, and a lot of things happen in 2 years with legislation. So just something I recommend to check into on value, what is capped and what you can arbitrate. But last time I believe it was $5 million.
Okay. Excellent. And Josie Herrera, it looks like our team commented to you, but yes, this is being recorded. So if anyone wants to get a copy of this recording, please email us at at landsaletx.com. Sale is spelled SALE, and our team member Brooklyn put it in the notes as well in the comment section. So a final question from Haley: is there a cap legally on how much a property can increase in value in 1 year? If a property increases 300% from 2021 to 2022, is that considered reasonable to the appraisal district? Now, again, we want to mention that doesn't mean that if it's a homestead, Haley, that doesn't mean that what you pay goes up by that much. Legally, it's only 10%, but the actual value.
So your value, there's no cap. It can go up 1,000%, 2,000%, whatever the market's indicating. Because at the end of the day, what happens is, as much as the state would like to say that they're not involved with local values, that's far from the truth. Because every appraisal district gets what's called a property value study, and the state gets more sales than we do, and they don't share them with the local appraisal district. They're going to have, in other words, they're going to have all the cards, and you just got to deal with the hand you're dealt here at the appraisal district. But they're going to make sure if the market is indicating that there was 1,000% increase in this county, it's going to be reflected, or they're going to fail property value study, which can result in school districts losing funding and things like that. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, the state's not involved. They say the state's not involved, but they are. They do a property value study, and that's why there's not really a cap. It just has to show what the market is. That's why they call it market value. So unfortunately, there is no cap on that.
Yeah, and Haley, that's a great question. And this just solidifies our point and the whole reason that we wanted to do this for folks, because we're just like you. We're landowners, we're property owners, we're homeowners. It's crazy that there is not a cap on how much the value can go up. Thank God there's a cap on the homestead exemption, but that doesn't mean that your value is not going to continue to go up. So again, we always personally recommend we're going to protest all of our properties. So really appreciate everyone joining us today. Those are all the questions that have come in, and just wanted to reiterate, folks, that this was just for educational purposes. We are not licensed tax professionals or attorneys or CPAs or investment advisors. We just wanted to give the good folks of Central Texas hopefully some knowledge and ammunition, so if you want to protest your property taxes, you can do it on your own. And it really is so easy. Like we discussed, it's just 4 simple steps to go through. And even though it might seem daunting, or it might seem a little scary doing especially the formal hearing, I actually really enjoyed it when I did it. And again, the formal hearing, they're just volunteer based. They're our peers. They were much nicer than the folks that I talked to at the county for the informal hearing. So just wanted to say, thank you to everyone. Again, I'm Casey Gorms. This is Daniel Tovar.
And real quick before we wrap up, I just wanted to mention there's 2. I mentioned one of the amendments earlier to the state constitution.
Oh, yes.
So they're proposing, hopefully, I believe it's May 16th they're voting on, or May
7th.
May 7th.
May 7th, so right around the corner.
Yeah, so they're voting on these 2 amendments. One is proposing to increase your homestead from $25,000 to $40,000 off of your property value, not your taxes, off of your property value. And then there's also another one that's proposed for folks who are over 65, and it's going to put the freeze effectively on their taxes, but then it's talking about year after year lowering the tax amount. So those are the 2 things currently that are up for vote and can hopefully get passed through and help us out here in Texas. So just wanted to mention that too before. It's very important to vote on some of these amendments and some of these House bills that come up that pertain to property taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everyone, thank you again so much for your time. Again, our company is Land Sale Texas.